Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to the Safeguarding Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Straight into the agenda items then. Item 1, apologies.
We have apologies this morning, Chair, from Mrs Burnett and Mrs Eagland.
Thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. None. Item 3, minutes of the Safeguarding Overview and Scrutiny Committee held on the 20th of April. I assume everyone's had a copy of that, the opportunity to read it. And are you all happy that I sign it as a true and accurate record of the meeting? Thank you. Item 4, focus on the future. I understand we've got, is it 3 presentations? We're going to, I assume, Mark, yours is first, seeing as you're in the chair. Did you want to open it up?
Yes, by all means, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to you all. I think it's good, isn't it? Probably at that midpoint now in 4 years of the administration, and what we probably made suggestions about what we would be doing 4 years. You know, two years ago for the next 4 years, things move on and change. And at that point, we were very much in the throes of that transformation. So that was clearly very much I think, the focus of both myself, officers, cabinet, and clearly from a scrutiny point of view as well. You know, so I think this is an opportunity to reset and have a look and make sure that, you know, we give you the information about what we think are the important areas, so that you can then make a decision on the types of things that you actually physically want to scrutinise and need further information on. The one thing I would say is, I think on your forward plan, we've got transformation I think that's changed now, not necessarily about transformation, but about the whole system, and just to model it on transformation, I think is probably looking a little bit backwards, and I think we do need to look forward. So as part of an introduction, I wasn't going to go through the individual items. Neelam's got the presentation here that I understand that Natasha's put together, so if you're happy, I'll hand over to Neelam and she can go through the specifics of it.
Thank you for that. Over to you then, Neelam.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. I realise it's my first time at this committee meeting, so I'm particularly pleased to be here. So what I want to do is, I will try to remember to talk and move the slides on at the same time as well. So what I want to do is really take this opportunity to share with you the key developments that are happening nationally or are on the horizon, and what we are doing within the service, which should be of interest to you, and the areas you may well want to scrutinise and ask officers more information about. So if I start off with the national changes and the national situation, you would have heard about the care review, which was published. And then there was the government's response to that. And the response that the government made came under the heading of Stable Homes Built on Love. So the care review is really now, we are referring to it, Stable Homes Built on Love. And what you have in that, and you would have had papers beforehand, that the review is now divided into 6 pillars, focusing on different aspects. So care review was a whole system review, absolutely looking at everything to do with children's services, and 6 pillars are really family help, to make sure help is provided at the earliest opportunity before the situation deteriorates and children or families move into safeguarding and children in care arena. Similarly, a decisive multi-agency protection system. And the dialogue going on is whether there should be specialist child protection teams rather than all social workers doing child protection, or whether there should be senior practitioners who specialize in child protection. And you will remember the tragic deaths of Star Hobson in Bradford and Arthur Lavinia Hughes in Solihull, and there were national reviews following those two deaths. So the recommendations coming out of those reviews was that there should be specialist multi-agency teams, but the professional opinion from Association of Directors of Social Services actually is at variance of that. And the reason for that is if you start building specialist teams for this, that, and the other, then you're actually diluting the experience. And if there is deficit in that team, then who does that work? And you also then de-skill other social workers who should be dealing with. So that opinion is divided, and we will see how that pans out as the debate progresses. Next one is unlocking the potential in family networks. So really, before we take a child into care, we always look around to see if there are other family members, friends, who we may be able to assist, whether it be financially, with respite care, to take on the care of the child. And so one of the pillars is exactly exploring that. And I'm actually pleased to tell you that we have been chosen as one of the, I think, 6 or 7 authorities as the pilot authority. So there's 2-year pilot going on. We are in the 2nd year, so there are 3 authorities chosen for year 1, and we are in year 2. And there is actually quite a, I mean, I don't know the exact magnitude, but we might be talking about 100,000 plus money coming with that pilot. And basically what that looks at is, could we offer financial help formally to families, say for transport? If they said, no, we can't take the child to school, school is too far away, we could actually help the family pay taxi fares, so we could pay them to do that. So we are in that pilot, and that is really testing out how formal packages of support and financial help could enable extended families or friends to care for the child. Then the other pillars are really looking at how do we recruit foster carers? Do we need to be looking at a different structure of paying them? Because some authorities do have salaried foster carers. And it's also, what else do we need to be doing in terms of leaving care allowances, etc.? Similarly, it's also looking at the social work workforce. So one of the matters you may well heard about is shortage of social workers, but then people going off to work for agencies, and often we were getting the same people back, having to pay twice as much for the agency workers. So government is very seriously consulting and looking at whether there should be something in the regulations which says people have to work for local authorities or voluntary sector at least 5 years post-qualification before they can join an agency. So though we are doing a lot of work as a West Midland region to look at a memorandum of understanding so people don't jump from one authority to another, but the government is also looking at in terms of what is the standard of qualifications and when can they work for agencies, and maybe even regulating the agencies a little bit more. And the last pillar as usual, is really to do with continuous learning, but also using proper frameworks so that you don't have in one authorities people can be team managers after 3 years or 2 years even, and in another they have to wait 5 years. Similarly, in some places they might be doing child protection work after 18 months, in others 3 or 4 years. So really that just gives you some feel for what the childcare review has turned into. And it would be right to say, and if you hear Josh McAllister, who did the review, he would say progress is not as fast as he would have liked. And it is kind of relying on pilots here and there. And we are just hoping that in the next 2 years it will pick up impetus. I mean, we were delighted to be picked as one of the pilots, but we know generally what works. But what we do need is that commitment, that wholesale review, and the finances that will enable us to change that system around. So that's the national picture, and it may be that from time to time you may just want to check how the unlocking the potential in family networks that we have been picked as the pilot for is coming along. But as I said, we are in year 2, but in year 1 we will be joining the various learning groups. We will see what first year pilot studies are doing and what's coming out of those authorities. Then looking much more internally at our own work and what you have already had come here, that last October the Cabinet did approve family hubs and the rollout of that. So we've been progressing that really gradually, both with our staff, appointing the relevant people, and with our partners. And what we will be looking there is to make sure that as we develop family hubs, families have much easier access to services, and we are using data to measure the outcomes, and we have good governance and leadership in place, and communities are involved. And that's where, wherever possible, we are really rolling out family hubs in line with our district places, so that partners, voluntary sector, schools, they are coming together on those district models. And we are equally then keen to make sure that we are developing our workforce to be working in that early help way and doing as much as we can at the much earlier stage. And obviously in all this, it's underpinned by the experience and voices of the children and the families we are working with. So as they are being rolled out, and we will have our evaluation matters in place to see how well we are working, whether the progress is same in all the districts, or whether we need to pay attention to one place or another more. You may well want to ask for a progress report on that. And then other thing we will be addressing is the Children in Care program, and I'll come to that first. So you might have from your perhaps previous presentations heard that though we had the right number of children in care about a year 18 months ago, but children in our care stayed much longer than anywhere else. And that was evidenced by, we call it the Newton study. It was done by an organization called Newton, and they looked at county council networks, 6 county councils, and compared the data with other places. And out of the 6 county councils, what was very apparent was that we took the right children into care, but we were quite slow in terms of moving them on in our system, with reuniting them or looking at permanency so that they stayed in our care much longer than anywhere else. So really, our focus, and certainly coming up to a year that I have been in post as the DCS, we have had absolutely unrelenting focus on that work. And the reason for that is that all the research evidence shows that generally children in care do not do as well as children in the general population or children in need. So children in care are overrepresented in the criminal system, not in the mental health system, not having professional qualifications. So really, some children do well, but the majority of children in care do not do that well. And the other thing research tells us is that after leaving care, most children do return to their families of origin. So we've been using that research, but also the Newton research, to make sure we improve our reunification offer, we develop better edge of care services, we ask our independent reviewing officers to be more robust in their scrutiny of the care plan, and we've been looking at, so we've been doing what we call cohort analysis. That's basically looking at every single child in care and checking if they have the right plan. Has the situation changed so that they could return either to their family or extended family networks? So that's the detailed work we have been doing in relation to our children in care. And if I can go back to the previous slide, maybe, yes, and that's where our placement sufficiency strategy comes in, that we need the right placements for the children who do need to be in our care. And what we have found is, with COVID, there is now evidence emerging that children's needs have really become very complex and at a much younger age. So we are having 12, 13-year-olds in our system whose behaviors are so complex as to be almost unmanageable in the straightforward care setting. So we are ending up having to pay 2-to-1, 3-to-1. And for some children, providers are even asking for 4-to-1 staffing ratio. And we find we are not getting placements at the right time, in the right place. We are having to use unregulated placements, which are really not, again, producing the right outcomes for the children. So our sufficiency strategy, which has been developed, is really looking at how do we increase the number of children living locally, how do we work with the providers in a more meaningful way, and how do we develop services which actually stop placements breaking down. And if I give you one example of the strategy we developed, it's a mockingbird scheme where one experienced foster carer would maybe assist a cohort of 6 or 7 foster carers. So though they have their individual children, but they will work very collaboratively, providing breaks for each other. And we've managed to, as part of the investment from the Cabinet, we did actually manage to get some more funding to develop more of that scheme amongst our foster carers. And so really, that is a big area of work that we are absolutely committed to carrying on with, and then making sure that we provide the right care for our children. And part of that also involves working with our partners who also are perhaps in some ways still acting in a very risk-averse way. So trying to have those discussions with them, which says, look, children in our care are not necessarily any safer than they are living at home. We need to be enabling, facilitating, providing the right services to parents, rather than thinking bringing them into care is going to solve all our problems. And other areas of work which you may wish to consider, so our MASH, so that's the Multi-Agency Safeguarding Hub, since Stoke decided to separate and have their own MASH, we have developed the Staffordshire Children's Front Door. And that is work in progress at the moment. You may want to perhaps look at that in the coming months to see how that partnership front door is working. Similarly, I know you do get the annual report from the Safeguarding Board, and so that will continue. And as Councillor Sutton said at the beginning of this presentation, we are really seeing our transformation now more business as usual. So we are district-based, working right through the journey, child's journey through our system. And you may want to check how the work is progressing, how that stability is now showing, what's the evidence, what are the outcomes that we are achieving which are different. And finally, you would be aware that we did get from the Cabinet 5.75 million investment. And that investment, with any major change, you really have to see there's one thing when you make the plans and theoretical, and then you see what changes have happened and whether we have got the right resources in place. So, for example, our number of education, health and care plans had increased massively. And the resource that we put in terms of the number of educational psychologists and SEND key workers was simply not sufficient for the increase. Similarly, when we looked at the children's social workers, we were fourth from the bottom in terms of what we paid our social workers out of 14 authorities. And our social worker, unlike some other places, did not have career structure. So we've actually used that investment to create career structure between senior practitioners and team manager posts, but also to address the pay issues so that we are not kind of fourth from the bottom out of 14 agencies. So that's something you may want to look at as to what the impact the investment has had. I think I've given you enough there, and I shall stop there.
Neelam, thank you for that. It was really informative. Just before I open it up for any comments or questions, can I just echo the point that Councillor Sutton made about actually, in addition to the scrutiny function around this, one of the primary objectives here is what are we looking to scrutinise in the future? What do we want to see brought back? What sort of facts and figures, I suppose, and results? So I just urge members just to keep that in mind as well, because I do think it is important. We have made certain issues previously about the lack of data, not knowing quite whether our strategies are working or not. So are there any comments or questions? While people are thinking about it, could I just ask a couple? I think the strategy feels right, doesn't it? It must be right that the way that we approach these particular problems is to offer that early help to see if we can prevent that child suffering any more and going through any further problems. Also, I think that looking for the wider family issue, if their own family can't do it, again, feels the right thing for me for us to be doing. Looking at foster carers, trying to improve the quality and number that we have, and also improving the issues about where we put young people, all feels right to me. A couple of things. The second point that you mentioned about this professional or specialist child protection officers, and you already pointed out this business about that sort of conflict resolution bit about do we de-skill certain people or not. From a Staffordshire perspective, do we have a view on what that should be? Are we leaning towards whether we have specialists or whether we have a general approach to this particular issue? Because I'm pretty sure things like geography will play a part here, won't they? When you are a largely rural county, if you have specialists, then are they available everywhere to be able to do those particular things? I'll stop there. I've got a few other questions, but I think that Councillor Sutton, I think you indicated.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just a few comments, if I may, and we will remember a time when there were specialist or family protection units, as we, multi-agency ones in the past. But linking that to a issue we do face, and this is not just us; it is a national issue, and it isn't always in every area of the county. But our workforce issues, where we do have difficulty recruiting, do have difficulty keeping staff who then move on, tends to be more in those frontline teams dealing with that those sort of safeguarding issues, as opposed to, and I'm not saying they don't deal with safeguarding issues, recruiting to teams dealing with children once we've taken them into care and that type of thing. So linking to what the government were looking at personally, I would like to see something where social workers have to spend a certain amount of time dealing more with that frontline, safeguarding stuff before they get a proper qualification. Because anecdotally, I know of social people who've become social workers, and after 12 months, and this is happened to somebody I know, and after about 12 months, they moved away from that and they go into a different area, and we can't necessarily stop that, because if we do, they'll just say, okay, we'll go into another authority and get a job in another authority. So when you haven't got nationally the workforce available, it is a very difficult situation to deal with. So I'll be honest, I haven't necessarily discussed our view with Neelam and listened to in detail the evidence. So I can't physically answer the question what our view is. I'd want to see the evidence before I had a view. That was just sort of some of my personal views. I've got comments on other things that maybe you might want to look around scrutiny and what's more important, but perhaps I'll leave those to when everyone's had an opportunity to ask a question.
No, I don't think it was essential that we had an answer about that. It's interesting that we're having a debate and thinking about it, and it's interesting that that is a national thought process, because like you say, we can all remember when things used to be either very specialist or very, very general. Are there any other questions? Anyone indicating? Oh, yeah. Councillor McMahon.
There's a piece in the national bit that worries me, and I just wonder how we're going to manage this locally. And it talks about a multi-agency approach with the police and the NHS. And how can we scrutinise a multi-agency approach? It appears as if when there are multi-agencies involved, it goes to the Health and Wellbeing Board. Now, I chaired the Health and Wellbeing Board from both sides of the fence, and in my day, it wasn't fit for purpose. And I'd be interested to know where the Health and Wellbeing Board sits now. Is it a more robust scrutiny organ than it was in the past? And because I think the multi-agency approach is really important and very difficult, actually. And I'm keen to understand where that piece will be scrutinised and whether that scrutiny is fit for purpose, because it would be, I think it would be difficult to do it here, really. The second bit involves not so much scrutiny as dialogue, I suppose. This is local. The family hubs approach is a great one, and it's never dawned on me to ask this question before, but where do the district and boroughs, councils, sit in terms of, because they have a more local feel than we do. I'm not for a minute suggesting they scrutinise it. The scrutiny should sit here. But is it appropriate to have somebody from the district and boroughs, for instance, sit on this committee at a time that we're looking at that? So I know it would make the committee a bit bigger, but it's just, I'm struggling for a solution. But I think there is a means by which the whole business of the discussion could be more robust, because things are different in different localities. There's no question of that.
Thank you for that. Councillor Sim.
So, answer the questions as they come, but I'll try and link them together because I think there are links. Health and Wellbeing Board, I see as a strategic body, not a scrutiny body, and perhaps we could, in another place, another time, discuss that, because I don't think it's the role of Health and Wellbeing Board to scrutinise things, maybe to hold people to account, which I think is slightly different, but mainly to set the priorities and set the strategy, and then to see if people are delivering on that. I think the ideal body, if we did have one of these multi-agency protection teams, whatever you call them, would be the Children's Safeguarding Board, because that is made up of the three significant partners: health, police and ourselves. So those partners sit on that. Neelam is the county's representative on that. Should be an ACC from the police and then health lead. But there are lots of work. There's lots of work that needs to be done, I think, about devising some sort of way. Now, underneath the Children's Safeguarding Board, there is an assurance team of officers from all those areas at a lower level than Neelam, that actually do the work to see what's going on, and then it's for the Safeguarding Board to satisfy itself that what's being done is right. Is there room for doing that better and improvement? There probably is. Is there room? Is there a need for us, particularly when dealing with complex children, the ones that actually are costing us and society an awful lot of money at this moment in time, to have a better joined-up approach between the police and health? Absolutely, and there were, and there's been recent, court judgments, particularly from the health perspective, that support that view. District and boroughs, yes, I think we need to have some more involvement. So from a health and wellbeing point of view, how we engage a little bit better with members from districts and boroughs is a piece of work that we've instigated. We start, but that's purely from a health and wellbeing point of view. I think in relation to family hubs and how safeguarding and the whole system is working, we now have a district model. So perhaps one of the things that you might want to consider scrutinising and have some work on is how those district models is working and what the district leads think and how they are operating, because I think one of the roles of the district lead, and there's one in each of the districts, is to work with their district or their borough to try and bring things together so that the system is understood an awful lot better. So a piece of work on that, so you can assure yourself that that is being done, or if it's not being done, where it can be improved, I think would be a really good thing. But I'm not sure you could, and it might be that you have there is a one-off session where member representative from district and boroughs come together, but suggestion of having them all the time, or I think the difficulty if you have a representative of the district and boroughs is how you ensure that person can give an account of what's happening across the county and not just default to their own district, which we all do, don't we? Default to that. So I don't know whether Neelam has anything that she'd like to add.
So a couple of things I'd like to add. One, that the safeguarding arrangements is chaired by an independent scrutineer, Ian Venal, who probably seen him present the annual report here. So his role is really to provide that independent scrutiny that the three strategic agencies are actually exercising and discharging their duties in relation to safeguarding children. And he provides that challenge, both to us as partnership and to individual agencies. And it would be fair to say that health in children's space has perhaps not been as prominent as we would have liked. But I am pleased to say that that situation is beginning to improve. We've had instigation of this matter, in fact, at the chief executive level. And very shortly, I'm going to be picking up again, various agencies and even the neighbouring authority wants to work with us on that because they share the same ICB with us to really look at how do we provide services for children who do not have any necessarily medical diagnosis of mental health or other diagnoses, but their behaviours are so risky and complex that we cannot deal with them in isolation. Police is being called out 3 times a day because they've got onto the roof or on the bridge or they're jumping in the road, and yet they don't have a diagnosis of any sort. So I am pulling together a group to really come up with a proper pathway as to how do we involve the relevant partners, whether or not a child has diagnosis or not, to say this is the presenting picture. How do we work together to manage that? So we are doing that. Moving on to the district works, I know that the district partnerships have already developed. They are better in some places than others, but they are certainly coming together to look at children, look at issues, and I know that we've done some really good work, particularly in, for example, securing housing for our care leavers in particular districts. So I think going forward, I want to see much more of a template of how do we see and what do we want to develop for children and families in each of the districts, and we really learn from what works best as well.
Thank you for that. Just on that point, and I think the issue around the measurement of multi-agency working, do you think, I know you mentioned in the presentation that the MASH actually have an important part to play in this process. From my previous experience, it seemed to be the first time that the agencies formally come together There are informal arrangements around how some of those things are done previously. And also, importantly, I know that the MASH sometimes complain about inappropriate referrals to them. If our strategy is right about early help, then looking for wider family support, looking for all of those things, and we can significantly reduce the numbers that then end up being referred to MASH. Because is this process about it being almost transactional or transformational? With that £5 million, are we simply buying £5 million more of the service that we currently offer? Or does this strategy purport to try to transform that service, therefore making those referrals unnecessary because we've got the things right at the beginning? And also, I think in this process as we move forward, you'll be aware that I think the Metropolitan Police, several other police forces, and I think including Staffordshire Police, have made it very clear that moving forward they are retreating from all of those social care type calls that police forces get. The Met has made it very clear. I understand Staffordshire Police have made the same promise. How do we then scrutinise the impact of that? More importantly, how do we scrutinise whether Staffordshire as a county council is able to respond when, I think, Neelam, you were talking about someone being on a roof for the third time, jumping out in front of cars. If we have a police response that says we're not responding to those things, over to you, these are health and or social care issues, then I think that is a huge threat to this particular strategy. And I think from a overview and scrutiny committee here, we would all want to make sure that whatever strategy our local police force adopts, and if it is likely to have a big impact on this, then I do think moving forward we need to be able to measure, view, take an analysis of how that affects us as we move forward. And I keep coming back to, I think the MASH probably is one of the places where we can make that decision about whether £5 million has transformed the service or is just a transactional reaction and we've just simply bought more of the same. But it sounds like you're having conversations around that.
I think one of the things I want us to be very clear, and maybe we do need to provide some written information about that the investment that we had is for very specific purposes where we were either able to evidence increased volume of work and not enough staffing had been put in at the time when we went to district models, or where we've said things work and we want to do more of that. So one of the examples I've already given you is that the number of EHCPs have gone up so much that we do not have sufficient capacity in the system of educational psychologists and SEND key workers to be able to do the plans within 20 weeks. So that capacity, that investment, is to make the shortfall which already exists. But what we are hoping to use that capacity is not just to do more of the HCPs, but use that extra educational psychologist capacity also to do early work with families, with providers, because sometimes it's the child's development that is been delayed, and if not addressed early enough, leads to need for EHCP. So if we can use our EPs to actually do early intervention work with providers, childcare providers, with parents, then that will hopefully further down the line alleviate that need. So we are not sort of putting investment in pockets. Similarly, as I mentioned to you, Other factor was where we were fourth from the bottom in social work pay. That pay, to bring it up the table, is really meant to retain our workforce so they don't leave us to go and work somewhere else. So they will still be doing the same work, but hopefully staying with us much longer. Similarly, the investment for career progression, again for that reason. We have added 2 more missing workers because given the number of children we are having in our system who are at risk of exploitation or going missing, we needed extra capacity to be able to manage that need and demand to keep children safe. So I think if you look at different components of the investment as to the purpose it's serving, so whether it's the Mockingbird scheme to retain, support foster carers, then you will see that that's for a specific purpose which as a whole system will be helping us to develop and maintain. But it's not 5.75 million per se to transform. So I just wanted to clarify that situation. Similarly, I think going forward, picking up the issue of police, and that's where what I was saying was, if we plan at a much earlier stage, and we have clear pathways when I talked about the complex children, then we will have a multi-agency plan right from the beginning as to how we manage this young person, what risks we as multi-agency body are able and prepared to take with a young person, so that when somebody gets on the roof, we've already agreed whether we do leave someone on the roof. You know, I'm not saying we will, but I'm just saying if we've already had that dialogue, that as long as they're not throwing bricks from the roof or, you know, save somebody, we know that all they're doing is sitting on the roof for 2 hours to gain attention. You know, does it always help to send 3 policemen and, you know? So it's that sort of dialogue right from the beginning, because often police or health will say, must take this child in care, can't be left. And you say, well, how do you think we're going to make them any safer? You know, so it's that dialogue at an earlier stage. Let's plan it. Let's decide what is reasonable and needs doing, rather than just what we've always done.
No, thank you for that. I know we were only just using examples, but I can't see a time when a police force would let a vulnerable child sit on the roof, whether they were throwing bricks or not, to be fair. And I do think this business about, you know, have we taken into account multiple or people going missing, young people going missing on multiple occasions, I have a feeling that local police forces will start to say this isn't our business, and I think it will impact on what we do here. I think, Councillor Edgeley, you wanted to add one.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, I did say at the corporate parenting panel, actually, and I've got to say it in this committee, I was very pleased the way that it's been done for the not looked after, our children in care, because, you know, being a former foster parent and adoptive parent, I've got to say what I'm hearing now about multi-agency actually is absolutely what we need. I'm a person that's actually had to phone the police. I've ordered a social worker out of the house because the work's not being done properly. I'm going back a few years, I know, but so I'm really pleased to hear the work that is being done. And it's like history repeating itself, listening to what you're saying about what children do. So the multi-agency approach for myself, and I think is absolutely spot on, actually, to bring them together. Talking about foster parents and how we can help them, I've talked to a lot of foster carers. Alan Hudson that set the breakfast meetings up, I've been to meet them and that. And one thing they did say to me was, as foster carers and what have you, is there any, and I think I've mentioned this to Councillor Sutton in the past, about them being paid, their council tax being reduced to help them. That is something that they've asked, and I said I would bring it to meetings. So they're asking for council tax reduction. And my other question really is, I am really concerned about the children and their mental health, the children in care. And are we doing all possible that we can to help these children? Because I know there's a lack of staff and everything. And I don't know the answer. I just put it to you. Can we do any more than we are already doing for the waiting times that they've got? Thank you. Because I know it's a major issue out there.
Thank you, Woody. Thank you. I'd maybe just take a few more questions rather than put them all to you. Councillor Snape, I think you were next.
Thank you, Chair. The first thing I'd like to say is that children's services and children's safeguarding is perhaps the most important thing we do as a county council, and also the most difficult. Let's not beat about the bush. It's often a lose-lose. Whatever we do, there's somebody out there to give us a kicking. But this morning, I don't really think I've heard anything new that I haven't heard for the last 6 years, unfortunately. I've been on this panel for the best part of 6 years. Going back to 2017, we had the Educare Service Review. It's things we've just gone through today, really. Increased number of children living locally. We spoke about that 6 years ago. Eliminate use of irregular placements. We spoke about 6 years ago. Yet we spent £5.7 million and an awful lot more money. We've had the children's transformation to try and reduce the number of kids in care. I think now the latest figures, it's more than when we started the programme. 64 pence in every pound that people pay in council tax goes on social care. I don't know the breakdown between adult and children's social care, but I'd like to know that, if possible, how much people actually pay for children's social care. It's not an easy thing. I've worked in the public sector now for 45 years, and as Councillor Sutton rightly said, joined up work between police forces, health and stuff, in relation to children and of social care, it's almost impossible to achieve. They've all got their own objective, their own budgets, how they want to spend that budget. For times in the 90s, I was running the Vice Squad in Wolverhampton, where we had girls of 9 and 10 on the streets of Wolverhampton. They call it trafficking now. But even then, trying to work with social services, it wasn't Staffordshire, it was West Midlands and Wolverhampton. It was almost impossible. People didn't want to know they were naughty kids, that's all people ever clapped at. They weren't. They were being put there by men and women occasionally who were trying to make money out of it. So I know how hard you're working, but when Councillor Sutton says we mustn't look backwards, it's all about the future. Well, we've got to look backwards to make sure we're doing it right, because we've spent all these money things, and I'm sorry, Councillor Sutton knows I was anti the transformation process because I said it won't work at the start, and unfortunately I believe I've been proven right. I don't think it works. I think we've got to review the whole lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wildman.
I had to follow that. I'll take it down a slight notch.
Sorry.
But no, it's fine. No, but they are relevant. They are relevant points. Just on family hubs, I think it would be useful to just hear about service users' feedback, not just the feedback from the people who are actually employed in that service. So a whole approach to feedback rather than just district councillors or whoever else. But I agree, I think it should be looked at. And one of the concerns I would have is that, let's say, take Burton-upon-Trent East Staffs. You have a children's centre, which is in the middle, which is essentially the family hub. But that's right in the centre. Public transport's not great. East Staffordshire is a huge geographical area. How accessible really are our services that are provided through the family hub to those people who really genuinely need it? And that to me is a little bit of a concern. So I would like to see that scrutinised as part of our work programme. And the second point is around early help. Now, Mark will know, obviously, that I was and am still involved in a family support charity. We have had, we haven't got a contract at this moment in time, but we have had a contract from Staffordshire County Council to provide early help support within East Staffordshire. What my observations are is that the amount of visits that we are paid for, I say we, but there are other family support providers there now, that are being, so the amount of visits that we are being paid for to speak to and visit children who are on that kind of cusp of care situation it really isn't intensive enough. There may be maybe 4, 5, 6 visits over a space of 28 weeks. It's something of that nature. And the children that we were dealing with are becoming more complex. And so to try and deal with that within that 28 weeks, really it's just a revolving door. It feels like you're spending a lot of money, because it's probably millions of pounds worth of taxpayers' money to do this, but the outcomes, over that period, I'm not 100% sure that we're getting the outcomes that we would like to see to prevent those children coming into care. I'd like to see the data on it. And of course, organisations are going to say that are providing early help, well, we do an excellent service and we do lots of work and help. And I'm sure there are very specific examples of it. But it's not necessarily filtering down into the numbers, is it? And I think that's part of the problem. So what I would like to see, and it's a suggestion, is scrutiny on this, but whether our early help strategy over that 20-week period with the visits that we require, is that really moving the dial on the kids that we need to help and support from going into care? Big question, but yeah.
Thank you. I think before I take the last 2 questions, I think we'll give you opportunity to respond to some of those points that were made. Councillor Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll try and go in reverse order and make a look at some of the notes that I've made. I think what Conor has just said about having that family hub, early help, and together with those that supporting families, as it's now called, that whole programme, would be an ideal thing, because I think it's crucial to be able to get that to work. And that links to many things. It links to early, not just early help, but early years, about whether children are school ready at 4.5, good level of development since COVID, hasn't fell through the floor, but it not far off has fallen through the floor. All those things are linked, and about how much that early help and investment in that sort of arena benefits going on and preventing children coming into care or coming into our system. The big difficulty with that is it is almost impossible to prove. It's something that people think is about right, but having concrete evidence, unless you've done a study over a long number of years, is very difficult to evidence and prove. I've been quite open and honest about this. I think that if there was something that transformation didn't do, transformation didn't look, I think, enough at that early years, early help part of the system, and say we need to do X, Y, and Z, and within that new system that will happen. But we're not there. You know, that wasn't done. Can't change the past. But as Paul has said, can use that to influence what we do going forward. So yeah, I think that should be on your work programme from my own perspective. I take issue a little bit, Paul, with some of the things that you've said about they've all come before. We've never had to deal as social services with such complex children that we deal with now. Not hundreds of them, but a few of them, with not being able to do anything concrete. I think in the past, a lot of these complex children that we are dealing with now, or trying to deal with together with police and health, would have been in secure accommodation. So Neelam and this authority would not be having to have meetings about unregulated placements every week to try and make sure that we are as much within the law as we possibly could. Because from my previous experience, those children would have been in secure accommodation somewhere, and they wouldn't necessarily have been an issue. I'm not saying that was the right thing to do, far from it, but what I'm saying is that, from my experience, would have been what would happen, and we would not have been having some of these complications. I don't know. Neelam would be able to answer this question better. I don't know whether we've faced such a workforce issue and problem with recruiting social workers and keeping staff over the years. I don't know. Certainly the 7 years I've done this job, it's always been a little bit of an issue, but not as bad as it is now post-COVID. We've never had such difficulty recruiting sufficient foster carers as we do now. I think, again, post-COVID, lots of foster carers have taken a look at their life and what they're doing and said, actually, when this child we've got reaches 18 and leaves us, or whatever, we're not going to do it. We're not going to do it anymore. So foster carers and how we recruit foster carers, and whether we have a system like what Neelam has suggested, where we have some professional foster carers and pay them a salary, is something I think we need to look at. And I would be, I would think it would be useful if this committee perhaps looks at our progress in relation to that. Placements. The county council budget is overspent, and all that overspend is basically down to placements. Without the placement overspend. But that links very much to foster carers, because last year I think it was about 88 children that the first suggestion coming into care was we need to look to a foster care place for them, and we couldn't, and they've gone into residential. It might have only been for a short period of time to start with, and then we've subsequently, but have, so those two things are linked. And family hubs is relatively. Is it much different from children's centres? It is a little bit. It's a different way of doing things. But so we've not done family hubs in the past, and a lot of that 5.7 million that was invested as a one-off by cabinet is in the SEND world with key workers. The massive, and it doesn't come to this committee, does it? I think it goes to Prosperous. The massive rise in the number and request for educational health and care plans, which is linked to the change in the regulations in 2014 and no money coming with it, and the massive expectation now, again rightly or wrongly, from parents, and not having sufficient staff to be able to deal with that massive. A lot of that investment will go there from having additional ed psychs, so that there's educational health and care plans can be done. I mean, I think, Neelam, I think I'm right in saying is that every 1 in 2 requests for educational health and care plans we reject to start with, and we're still seeing a massive rise in educational health and care plans, something that in comparison to the old statement, it's a massive rise. I'm not saying that's right, I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm just merely giving the facts in relation to that. So those are some of the areas I think you should look at. Now, if I just reopen my computer and come to the thing on what we spoke about the police and the police withdrawing from socially care type things, I think it's more particular to do with mental, people with mental health issues or apparent mental health issues, and not necessarily the whole social care. It's come out of a national partnership agreement called Right Care, Right Person, and I don't think anybody would disagree that somebody that has got mental health issues should be dealt with, should have the right care, and it should be the right organisation that deals with it. But the partnership is specifically about, through the model with specified focus on police forces and their role in mental health crisis. And there was a pilot, I think, in Humberside, and a number of police forces, including, I think, the Met, have decided that they would start doing it before maybe the pilots all finished. So there are questions, because we have, as a council, we have statutory responsibilities to people experiencing mental health crisis, and I think most local authorities would believe in that right care, right person approach, but I think there needs to be a conversation with it so that we don't end up, and health as well, probably us in relation to children, don't end up picking up the pieces. I was asked yesterday about the suggestion that around the police and police involvement. I make it quite clear, you know, I've made it quite clear to officers that if members of staff and members of staff at residential care homes are assaulted by people they are looking after, that's a criminal offence, and the police should be involved in that. And they can't not be involved in that. That's my personal opinion. I don't think the law's changed in relation to that. Somebody might correct me, but there needs to be that involvement. There needs to be that ultimate protection of people, doesn't it, who are working in the care system. You know, I don't think anybody's suggesting if somebody's just tapped on the shoulder or pushed that they're making a complaint of common assault. But once it gets more serious than that, my personal view at this moment in time is those people are more than entitled to make a complaint of a criminal offence. And I will leave it at that before I say more than perhaps I should.
Thank you for that, Mark. I think we all agree. I am conscious this is the first presentation of 3 and we're over an hour in. I've got 2 more. I'd just ask if we could be as brief as possible. Councillor Pardeshi.
Thank you, Chair. Just 2 very quick points. We know that the multi-agency working is crucial. When things go tragically wrong, you can almost be sitting there expecting the comment, well, there wasn't enough sharing of information, not enough collaborative working, whatever. So that is crucial for us to get that right. Secondly, we're hearing regularly about the recruitment and retention of staff. And money and additional salary makes a difference. But I wonder as well, and forgive me if it's already been taken into account, whether we need to be a little bit more imaginative and flexible in the terms and conditions that we offer. Are we taking into account people's childcare responsibilities? We have a local authority right now that's experimenting with a 4-day week. Well, whatever it is, maybe we're not quite that flexible, attractive employer that we should be, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'll take the final point from Councillor McMahon and then just wrap up.
Thank you, Chair. I think your piece about the police and their position and what Mark had to say is very pertinent, well made, and worrying to my view. It's clearly a risk to some children, and could end up being a reputational issue for the council. And clearly, we won't know what to do as a council until we get chapter and verse from Staffordshire Police. And I wonder whether this is a case for a joint letter from you two. And if the position, as you outline, is simply mental health, you can just see things falling through the net here. And if that's the case, then perhaps Julia should be involved as well. But I do think we need clarification so we know what is exclusively ours and what is jointly ours with the police.
Thank you for that. I think, yeah, I understand that, and maybe that might be an option for us. I can imagine putting a different hat on a few years ago. I would argue that from 5 o'clock in the afternoon till 8 o'clock the next morning, there's only one agency out there that's going to deal with bits and pieces. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, there's only the police, I'm afraid. Very quick if we could, Paul.
It is a quick suggestion. This committee and finance actually have the right to call the Chief Constable before us, as we've done previously before. It may be worth waiting except 3 months till we know a bit more what's going on, then ask the Chief and perhaps the Police Commissioner as well, who controls budgets, to come before us, and then we can ask them direct questions. Perhaps something, I don't know when they're looking for, perhaps September, something like that, October, when we know what's going to go on. I come and ask him to give us a presentation here before a joint committee of us and, well, he could even have help because it could be like the 3 scrutiny committees collectively talking through the matter.
Yeah, I think we'll give that some consideration. I just wondered if you wanted to answer any of those and wrap up. Neelam, I think you do.
I just want to please pick up very quickly a number of points that have been made, and in fact 1 or 2 things which greatly impact on our work, which haven't featured today. So unaccompanied asylum-seeking children numbers have literally gone up, doubled in the last 7 to 8 months. So though we do get some funding for them, but part of our problem has been that we have had more children come from hotels who were classified as adults, but then we found them to be children, and we don't get as much funding for them when we take them from hotels than when they come to us through national transfer schemes. So that, if you look at our underlying children in care, our children in care numbers are slightly down, but it's the unaccompanied asylum-seeking children which have made the total still appear quite high. So I wanted to just clarify that. And other thing we haven't mentioned is the cost of living crisis. And what is very apparent from that is that the combination of COVID and cost of living crisis has impacted both on children's mental health. We still have children who are refusing to go to school because of fear, and our number of home-educated children is the highest it's ever been. And that cost of living crisis is actually impacting on parents and adults' mental health and their ability to provide good enough care for the children. And that's why when you look at children in care data, numbers of children in care have gone up nationally to some degree or another, but they have gone up. So I just wanted to make that point. Sharing of information, we do have the right protocols in place, and it's just making sure that people on the ground do understand that and don't then hide behind confidentiality. And finally, you talked about the staffing. Yes, very clear message about hybrid working, but dependent on the needs of the job, because social workers do need to be able to see children face to face, have that contact with families. But there is that facility. People can work from home. They have their laptops. They have smartphones. They can work from other bases in the county as well. So it's that clarity between the team manager and the social worker as to what work arrangements they can have within the demands and need of the service. So we are very much, along with addressing pay and pay scales and career structures, looking at ways of working as well.
Thank you for that. It was a really interesting debate. I obviously covered quite a lot there. I just think in conclusion, I sense that the 2 issues that are coming out of this generally are ones around our preparedness in general, and as we move forward with this new strategy, the staffing levels of it, and also some of those external influences. We've discussed about the police, but there will be others. It does sound encouraging that we at least have thought through that process. And I think the other overwhelming thing that comes from this is this business about data, having an understanding, how much influences the family help having, how much is it reducing, all that. I think we talked about family hubs and data and outcomes, cohort analysis, I made a note. Would it be possible, or could we give some thought to, as we move forward, some meaningful statistics around some of that, so we can make a judgment about this £5.7 million and whether it is making a transformational impact on the way we deliver service. But I think in conclusion, it does sound like we have a handle on it. I think we all recognise that there are some immense challenges as we move forward, and the point you made about unaccompanied asylum seekers, that we probably didn't see that coming. So I think we all accept that there are huge challenges, and it is encouraging to hear that we have a strategy, hopefully, that will take us through some of that. So, Councillor Sutton, Neelam, thank you very much indeed for coming along and presenting that to us today. I hope I haven't cut anyone short, but there are another two for us to get to, and another one after that. Thank you again. Ruth, I think, and Paul, isn't it? I think you are on next. Paul, did you want to open up, or is it straight into the presentation?
Chair, we're talking about the strategy here, are we? The neurodivergent disabled, just to check. Oh no, this isn't me.
Sorry, Paul, that's my mistake. Adult safeguarding. I think it's Ruth then.
Yeah, it's Ruth. Yeah.
Sorry,
I think
do
it's
apologise.
me, yes. I am sorry, I've got a bit of hay fever at the moment, so if I sound a bit snuffly, I do apologise. So thank you for inviting me here this morning, just to give you an idea as to what's going on over the next sort of 12, 18 months with regards to adult safeguarding. I wanted just to start by saying, obviously, we're moving forward with the backdrop of CQC coming in potentially from October to inspect adult services. And part of that, and I would say quite a large part of that, will be our response to adult safeguarding. I think this sets us in a sort of different position to where we've been. And in some ways, that does raise, I suppose, some questions that we might need to look at as to how we currently respond, whether what we currently do is the right way. And I'm not saying it's the wrong way, by the way. I'm just saying I think we have to be open to those questions that are going to come our way, where we get directly compared to other authorities, something for a number of years we haven't yet had to face. So I'm going to try and give you an idea, maybe in a slightly different way to the presentation we've just had from Children's Services, but as to what we're looking at, as to the areas that we're going to be focusing on with regards to our improvements. So there are three areas I'm sure that you can appreciate, one of which is the MASH and the developments going on there. I know Neelam has just alluded to some of those changes, but I want to talk specifically about our changes from an adult's perspective. The next, for me, is obviously our response to Section 42 inquiries from a safeguarding point of view, but also wider work that we're doing to show you the breadth of our multi-agency work, and also working with our colleagues within our quality team as well to try and improve and streamline our services. And lastly, you will all be familiar with my love of talking about deprivation of liberty safeguards and the work that we're trying to do. And this committee has heard me talk, I think, at least on 2 occasions around this area over the last 12 months, and there's still much to be done. So that's where I'm going to start with the work we need to be doing over the next 12 months with regards to DOLS, as it's familiarly known. You will have all heard, obviously, last time me talking about the fact that the Liberty Protection Scheme that we had thought would be coming in has actually been put back to at least the start of the new government. Now, this committee has actually constructed and sent a letter to the government expressing concerns over this decision reached. And I would like to add at this point, there are other local authorities and also other committees, including the Committee on the Human Rights, who have also written to the government expressing their concern over the delay of the implementation of liberty protection schemes. That being said, we have to look at what we know, and what we need to be doing is making sure that we are in a much more stable and strong position moving forward in being able to reduce those backlogs that we know that we still have. As you will have heard me say before, we would like to have around 500 at any one time awaiting authorisation. We have some way to go to get there. However, we are now in the process of tendering for our new contract, which should hopefully provide us with a much more robust response to being able to increase the numbers of authorisations that we can do at any one time. Now, that doesn't come without other complications. So part of that is around us reviewing our current processes, and particularly the administrative process. You may recall me saying that actually this is quite an admin-heavy process. There's a lot of information sharing that goes on, a lot of sending out of information. Now, that means that actually it's quite labour-intensive, but we are looking at sort of AI or robotic methods that we can do to try and reduce that. And there are a number of systems that we could try. Now, we can't actually do that until we've moved more into Care Director. So actually those robots, as I call them, I do have little images of little robots working inside the computer, but supposedly it's not quite that fun. But what we need to do is move into Care Director first of all. And thankfully, the end of that is in sight, that we will, within the next few months, be moving into Care Director. It has required us to move a large portion of data across from the current system that's used into Care Director. So a lot of checking has got to be done to make sure that that information is accurate. But I think from the point of view of looking at what you might like to scrutinise going forward, it will be to see as to whether our efforts that we've already put forward to you are bearing the fruits as we would like. The numbers around doles have been, as you know, continuing to increase, but we are working to look at ways that we can manage all of that much better. So for me, I don't think we should lose sight of this over the next 12 months. I know you've heard me talk a lot about it, but I think it is really important and will be incredibly important from CQC's perspective as one of the main safeguards for adults. Okay. So, here we go. I'm moving on now to talk about the MASH. But before I do, I just wanted to read out to you what the CQC quality statement is for safeguarding, so you can see how relevant a lot of what we talk about with regards to the MASH and also with regards to our safeguarding process is. And I have got to look down and read because I'm sorry I haven't learnt it by right yet. I'm sure I will in a few months' time. So the safeguarding is to: we work with people to understand what being safe means to them and work with our partners to develop the best way to achieve this. We concentrate on improving people's lives while protecting their right to live in safety, free from bullying, harassment, abuse, discrimination, avoidable harm, and neglect. We make sure we share concerns quickly and appropriately. And I don't think that there's anything in there that none of us would want to achieve, and actually is something that we have been working hard as a council to achieve for a number of years. However, as I've said at the start, we have to look at how this is going to be viewed by CQC. One of these things is our early information sharing. We have had a MASH arrangement for a number of years, and as Neelam alluded to, this has been changing over recent months, certainly after Stoke-on-Trent's initial decision to move away from our partnership arrangement. This has led now to us being in the process of developing our Staffordshire Adults MASH. So this will be a MASH type arrangement that will be Staffordshire only and adults and adults based as well. What I do want to say, though, is that isn't done without partnership working still with our colleagues in children's services. We're very keen that we're going to remain co-located. Whilst our partnership arrangements may be separate, we recognise that a number of our partners are the same. And to do that individually may not always be appropriate, and that actually we do share information between ourselves as well. But what this does enable us to do, and whilst it might be seen to be some negatives, and for some people even a step back, what it does enable us to do is look at what we in particularly need in Staffordshire from an adult's point of view. And some of our partners are different. And some of the partners who aren't currently involved in the MASH, we need to get involved, particularly from some of our district colleagues in regards to, and borough colleagues in regards to things such as housing and other activities that at the moment we may not have such established good links to help us, particularly in the growing area that is self-neglect, substance misuse, etc. So developing those relationships and working on those are things that we are now doing. We also want to be making sure we're having earlier conversations and more of them earlier on, reducing the need for things to come through as a formal request for consideration of Section 42, but working with our partners to share that information earlier on. You may have just heard, and I know it was sort of spoken about, some of the changes that Staffordshire Police may experience might have a direct impact on us. So some of our earlier conversations where we can identify changes in people's presentation through their engagement with other services may help us then to better and earlier support them. Now, the MASH was originally set up for us to be able to have some of these earlier conversations, but unfortunately a lot of our time is taken up working in other areas, looking at some of the domestic abuse, etc. And I'm not saying that that isn't still relevant, but there are other conversations that we need to be having and sharing that information at those earlier stages. It also gives us a chance to consider the relationship that's always been there, and potentially as well the tension between quality, whether something's a quality concern or a safeguarding concern. So it has to be recognised that there are a number of concerns that come through to us from providers that may be seen to be a quality concern. However, what we need to balance that against is this is all information we as a council need to know. So some of these conversations within the MASH that we have may be a quality issue, but it's about us having the right quality partner, so either our quality assurance team, CQC involvement, and other bodies to support us with getting the right response for people as early on in the process as we can, to hopefully reduce some of those time delays that we may receive. As you heard in the statement from CQC, it is about us responding to things in a timely way, making sure we're looking at it as early as possible. To do that as well, we need to be working with our providers, and one of the things that our MASH colleagues, along with our colleagues, are doing is looking at providing more training and advice to providers. So actually really helping them with flowcharts, etc., to identify when something is a safeguarding concern as opposed to a quality issue. Using platforms that are already there, such as MyDOS, which is accessed by a huge number of providers across Staffordshire, so that they have a one-stop shop, as it were, to be able to look for what support they need. We're also developing, some people will be really pleased to hear this, an online referral form for people as well, for providers and for professionals, particularly for our colleagues in the NHS and in the police who don't work Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and who have necessarily the time to call our safeguarding line. But this will enable people to raise the concerns that they've got in an early way, and then hopefully enable us to be able to respond in a more timely way. We have had some feedback, unfortunately, where people haven't been able to get through and have kind of given up, and we don't want people to give up raising safeguarding to us. So it is about trying to balance that. So alongside our work within the MASH, we're also looking at our initial intake of that information to make sure that we're doing that in the right way. And that is going to hopefully as well work with some of our wider work around co-production. And I will sort of briefly mention now, we will be looking at getting feedback from adults who experience our service. So that early onset, our early intervention through the MASH, which is, and I hate to say it really, considering I've been around for all these years, we haven't actually done before. And I think we've recognised that where we think we're doing a good service, or where we feel we've been getting it right, we need to be hearing that from the adults who have experienced our service. So we are looking, and we've just started a pilot within the MASH to get that feedback from people who we've spoken with directly, which is an online form. So we're not asking them ourselves, which I was thinking. We'll then be able to see what response we get to that and how people feel about that. And that's just one of those areas. And for me, this redevelopment of the MASH should absolutely be something that you scrutinise and ask questions about and think about whether we are getting it right. It's changing, and I think we have to make sure that the actions that that me and my team are taking are the ones that you feel are meeting the needs of our communities. And absolutely, for me, that would be a really important part of the work of this committee. And finally, I do feel like I'm rushing through this, which is unlike me. And finally, looking at our wider safeguarding work, it's really come to my attention through our auditing cycle that actually there is some limited understanding within our workforce, within both our frontline workforce and our wider workforce as well in the county council, with regards to adult safeguarding and our approach. So we are looking at getting mandatory training for all employees of Staffordshire County Council for basic adult safeguarding awareness training. And again, this sounds something that we should have been doing. And I think at one point it was thought this is what was happening, but actually our front-facing staff across the county don't all have training in regards to adult safeguarding. And I'm really keen to raise the awareness of the importance of adult safeguarding. And wider to that, or I suppose within our own social care teams, is about giving them the right training and ongoing training to support them. So we've redeveloped that in line with our own procedures and working with outside providers to develop a new programme of safeguarding to really focus people around making safeguarding personal and making sure that they're not just doing this because it's a process and that they understand the importance of the work that they're doing. And then bringing that training out as well to wider partners. Now, we've always provided training to our police and health colleagues, but doing multi-agency training isn't something that we've ever looked at doing in the wider sense before, but is something that we'll be looking at going forward. And I know you guys have also requested some training around this, so you are all included within this training package that will be coming out over the summer months. So please, watch for the email and give me your feedback around that. The other part that we're looking at is the redesign of the safeguarding forms that are used. For a long time, we've used the same forms we had when the Care Act first came in. And it's recognised that practice has moved on somewhat since then. And actually, our forms don't enable people to practice in actually the best way. It's quite formulaic and quite repetitive. I won't go into all of the details. But we're working at putting two forms into one, which will then make it much more of a proportionate response and enable practitioners to record what's really pertinent to that person's circumstances, and work with that person. We're also looking at the safeguarding plans so that they can become more based on the person's wishes. It's really important in adult safeguarding that the adult is at the centre of the outcomes that they hope to achieve through the process. And so in doing that, our safeguarding forms and also particularly our safeguarding plan that's the adults should be representative of what they want. So making sure that we redesign them and work with people again who have experienced that. The next part is around developing, is around developing the quality assurance framework for safeguarding. Now, this isn't to say that it hasn't formed part of our wider quality assurance framework, but during our recent review, our CQC review done by Stafford and Wrekin, they identified this as a potential area of scrutiny that we might come under from CQC. So we're at the moment developing a quality assurance framework. Again, something that I think you would benefit from scrutinising as to see as to whether we are capturing adequately what we expect from practitioners and from partners with regards to their response to safeguarding adults in Staffordshire. It's going to be based around the Making Safeguarding Personal Principles, and it will obviously include things such as our audit cycle and other aspects, but we'll also talk about our commitment to our workforce and to our partners with regards to training and advice, and also what our expectations are from those partners as well. You again will recall from the CQC statement that it's very clear that safeguarding is a multi-agency response, and the CQC will be looking at how we engage with our partners. And yes, we do that through the board and we do that within the MASH, but it's about that everyday adult social care practice and adult safeguarding practice where we need to be developing that multi-agency response into safeguarding, and our quality assurance framework will seek to bring that together. And lastly, but by no means least, is again those feedback forms. Once somebody has had an inquiry done by Staffordshire County Council, as I've said, we're doing it at that early stage, but also when somebody has had that sort of full response, as it were, we haven't been receiving that feedback. And so we have developed some forms. They relate for the adult themselves who's been experiencing the abuse, for carers as well to give their feedback on how that process has been for them, and also for our providers as well who we will equally have engaged with. This is to try and understand actually whether what we do is meeting the needs of all of those different partners that we're working with, and help us then to develop going forward. Because I do listen to what's being said and being said in those earlier discussions. Social care can sometimes feel really cyclical, like I sit here 20 years down the line and think, I'm sure we were doing some of this 20 years ago, and I feel like I'm back here doing it again. But actually, it is that learning cycle, isn't it, sometimes, that we need to do. We need to look at what we've done, but to do that, we shouldn't do that in isolation. So that feedback will enable us to have that sort of 360-degree view over the work that we've been doing, and hopefully then be able to make more effective changes going forward. So again, that would just be my other area for you to consider over the next 12 months. And really from me, that's it. So any questions?
Thank you very much for that. That was really interesting. Whilst any members want to ask a question, while they're thinking, I'll ask a few. When we talked about deprivation of liberty, clearly that is very important, depriving someone's liberty. In fact, if that was in a criminal setting, when the police deprive somebody of their liberty, they have to offer them instant legal advice, and they can only keep them for 24 hours. It strikes me that the most vulnerable people in our society don't have those rights, and actually we can hold them for very long periods of time before we do it. I think we all feel comfortable around that process because I'm assuming most of these people are in care homes, and it is important that we protect them whilst we're doing that process. So I suppose the first question I would ask is, whilst we would always like the process to be much shorter, do we have any evidence that we're generally getting it right, or are we occasionally getting it wrong? Are we learning from that process? Because at least then that sort of damage limitation is, whilst it might take longer, we're pretty confident that our decision making is right in the long term. So that gives us some reassurance that the process is working. Second question's around the MASH, and I think you talked about getting the right response at the right time. The age-old criticism of the MASH used to be, and I'm hoping it's all changed, is that the way that you manage referrals and workload is that you raise the threshold. So therefore, when people are referred to a MASH, if you continually raise the threshold, you can artificially then manage the volume. And my understanding around adults previously, did they not have to have a diagnosed medical condition for them at least to enter? So that doesn't strike me as being inclusive and holistic. And the last question about the MASH and Stoke separating from us, and I know I've asked it before, but I'm pretty sure if we were looked to the minutes of this meeting many years ago, someone would have sat there and made a very passionate plea and a very convincing argument about joining the two together, and that's how the service would be delivered better. I can hear it now, all of that, you know, benefit of joining together. And it wasn't our decision to move away, it was Stoke's. Are we in a position yet to identify the impact that has had on us here in Staffordshire, and at least recognise where we are in that process? I'm sure we'll manage our own demands, but it does strike me that someone would have made a very convincing counter-argument a few years ago. So I think we have to be realistic about where we are.
Thank you for those questions. So the first one in relation to deprivation of liberty, what I would say is actually I do think we have the process right. It may be long, but actually we do know that our decision-making around people who are being deprived of their liberty is sound. We have some very good processes in place with supporting people who are objecting as well, with regards to access to independent advocacy and also then independent legal advice. So I do think we can, the process, yes, may be lengthy, but it does serve the purpose, the legal purpose it's there to do. It would be good if we could get it a bit more proportionate, so actually then we're seeing more people in a more timely way, so that actually they're afforded those protections in a much more timely way. That would be my point there. With regards to the MASH and the raising of thresholds and how we manage that work, I completely agree that there has previously been real restrictions and requests for information about people that actually isn't even written into the Care Act. So I want to offer assurances that it is the appearance of need somebody has that means that they should be assessed and supported and given an appropriate assessment, be that a safeguarding assessment or be that a Care Act social care assessment. And certainly within my teams, and I think I can speak as well wider for the work of our social care teams, is that that is now the premise we work on. It isn't about somebody needing a diagnosed condition, because actually then a lot of adults, particularly those experiencing mental health needs or neurodiversity, don't actually have a formal diagnosis, and even for people with dementia, early stages, etc. Sometimes a diagnosis can be a long time in the coming, if ever. So I think it's really important that we widen the knowledge around that. And hence why, whilst I'm not saying about opening the floodgates or creating demand when there is no demand, It is about us recognising that the Care Act does give us responsibilities over quite a wide group of people. But we can use some of our other partnership arrangements. So we are at the moment exploring the vulnerability hubs and other multi-agency environments to see whether that's a way we can equally share some of that information, so it's not always in one place, that we can spread some of that out. And then finally, looking at the MASH and with regards to the circumstances with Stoke, it is for me, and I will say this personally, disappointing that Stoke have decided to no longer work with us. And for me, there were many benefits of us working together and many benefits of support that we can give. I think it can be acknowledged that adults isn't always, and certainly adult safeguarding, isn't always the area that people see as being most important of the work that we do from a safeguarding point of view. And I'm not saying that obviously safeguarding children isn't important, but it's around that sort of equal balance and understanding. And when we worked alongside Stoke, I felt that it gave us that wider footing as well. However, we have to sometimes respect, I think, the decisions that are made by people in our neighbouring authorities. But again, we continue to work with them. We remain a joint adult safeguarding board, and also we remain joint with a number of our health and police colleagues. And the meetings that we're having regarding the MASH are actually still joint with Stoke-on-Trent. So we continue to learn from each other and look at best practice. And I hope that that wouldn't be anything that would change through our partnership, formal partnership arrangements changing. But I think it's absolutely right that it's raised and that we review that going forward to see if we do identify any areas that we are now missing or where we don't have sufficient information, etc. Thanks.
No, thank you for that. That's very reassuring on all of those accounts. Councillor McMahon.
You're talking about an online referral form in order to improve access, which is right and proper and to be commended. But there are organisations that we know of who perhaps over-refer. We certainly get a disproportionate number from them, and it seems to be a function of their size and their trigger happy. And this might increase that. And you know, I'm thinking of YMAS in particular, and you know, you're already under considerable workload, and you don't want to needlessly aggravate that by this process. So if you had any thoughts about how you might mitigate that, have you spoken to YMAS to try and do something about it? My second thought is such that if the MASH bit, and excuse me, I had to take that call, but if the MASH piece is of considerable concern, there is a change, I believe, in administration in Stoke, isn't there, as a result of May, and we might want to ask them whether they've changed their mind. Are prepared to change their minds.
Councillor Snape, I think you wanted to ask.
Ruth, thank you for the report. I don't think there's a lot we can change, really. I think everything seems to be going well, except for the government being slow on bringing the new legislation, which will assist us even more. A previous councillor, when she came here, basically said that it's better we have complaints for not getting dolls up and running quickly than we don't do one and we get it wrong and somebody, I'll put it away, dies is the best way to put it, really. So the question I really want to put is, do we get many complaints of late service of dolls? And how is that really impacted on us? I mean, the cost-wise and stuff. Does it mean you have to bring extra legal people in to do it? I know we've got an outside agency doing assistance for us, and the last meeting you said you're very happy the way they're going. So is there anything you think really we could do just to speed that little bit up, but still remaining safe?
Thank you. Can I just take one more, because I think we've only got one more question, Councillor Perry, and then maybe we can wrap that up.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much for the report. Sorry, it's just an observation on what you've just said about Stoke moving away from us on that particular issue, and that you're still working with them on certain things. It needs to, I'm sure you know this, it needs to be exactly what is responsibility of us and what is the responsibility of them, because if something goes wrong, each might be blaming the other, is where I'm coming from. So I'm sure you'll tie all the loose ends up, but it's just an observation on my part. I think we need to sort of be aware of. Thank you.
Thank you. Ruth, over to you.
Lovely, thank you. Okay then, so just on regards to your point, I would be saying you're absolutely right. Our conversations are with our partners. So it's about how our partner relationships, particularly with Staffordshire Police, are going to work going forward, so that actually we can see that there is, you know, I'm going to say equal sharing of the pie in that way, and that we're all satisfied. I do completely agree with you that what we can't do is have separate arrangements that sort of interlink but without anything really formal, that then people, when say CQC coming, are asking questions about, and I think you're absolutely right. Hence why we really need to have those sort of firm plans in place. And again, nothing is changing on the ground until those things are in place. So I think absolutely, because I think that is definitely one of those areas that, yes, I think could cause debate in the future if we're not careful. Absolutely. No, thank you for that. And then coming to the question with regards to the dolls, we actually don't get complaints about the delay. I don't know whether that is partly because this is something that providers put in rather than families themselves. Now, I don't think that's necessarily right, because when I sit here, I think if I was a family member, I now know what the process should be. So if my relative had been waiting for, 3 months, I would be asking those questions. However, I think we do make sure that providers are informing relatives, etc., and keeping people up to date. Our rough rate waiting time now is about 2.5 months, which I know isn't great, and I'm not saying it is, but nationally, we're actually in a better position than most other local authorities for that. So we are in a better position, and so in essence, our delays don't cause us any additional problems from a public perspective. So I think that's, a good thing. But that still obviously does open us up to sort of professional challenge. Now, just coming back then to the point around referrers and our online referral form, I am glad that people can see the real benefits of that. And I smile about West Midlands Ambulance Service because they don't follow our process now. So they use their own form and insist on using their own form. So I don't naturally know from conversation with them that they will use our online form because they have their one form that they are going to continue to use. They say, and in some ways rightly so, they work across 14 local authorities, all with different referral processes and all with different forms. So for them, enabling their staff to be as effective as possible, and we could maybe, have our own views on whether they make appropriate referrals, it actually does serve their purpose to use their own form based on the geographical area that they have to cover. And I actually do understand that. It might irk me on the one hand, but from a strategic perspective, I absolutely agree with them that it does enable them that consistency of response. And I can honestly say I know what I'm going to get from them, which I can't say about other agencies. So as much as I do still think there's work to be done with West Midlands Ambulance Service around what they refer to us, I do think that the use of that form isn't a hindrance, and so then the use of the online form shouldn't be. I do worry about our ability to get back in touch with referrers who have made an online form who haven't provided sufficient information. Historically, that's caused us delays, and that's why we've always attempted to make sure people contact us by phone. But what we're trying to put in there is elements of skip logic. So if they answer a question in a certain way, it's going to raise another question. So we're trying to make sure that they can't submit the form unless they're giving us the sufficient information. Because what we don't need is not having the right identification details for a person. If we've only got a first name, a part address, we can do some things, but we're not miracle workers. So we have to try and make sure that that form is going to give us the information we need, whilst making it more accessible for people, give the information we need. So we're looking at 2 forms, one for professionals, and then we will be, after we've had that one in to see how it goes, looking at one for the general public, which does raise more questions for us with regards to potential information. But again, it is about us trying to be as, as accessible to people as possible, and reduce delays in people being able to contact us as well. And the last point with regards to Stoke-on-Trent leaving the MASH, and whether, yes, you're absolutely right, they have had a change in administration. I have regular meetings with the PSW over at Stoke-on-Trent, and it is something that we continue to raise. We're not in a position now where we couldn't work together going forward if that was the decision. We're still working together at the moment, and as I say, our discussions are still happening very much jointly. So I do think that there is the potential, and again, I don't think that would necessarily be the wrong question to ask. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you very much for that. It's been really informative, and as usual, with all the questions that have been asked, I think very encouraging to hear that we have these things largely in hand. So thank you again for coming. Thank you for the report. Thank you. I think it's 2 hours in, so I think I'm going to take a quick 10-minute comfort break. We've still got 2 more to do, so if I could ask people to be back at 10 past, and then we'll proceed as quick as we can. Thank you.
because their meeting at 1 o'clock is...
Yeah. Can I just welcome everyone back? Thank you for getting back on time. We are conscious that we've run well over, or will do. Very kindly, Councillor Wilson and co, who were going to present around the Commissioner, we've thought of an alternative around that. Also, I think it's important that we hear the neurodivergent report, because that is time critical and it's going to Cabinet. And I'm also aware that you have to get away at 1:45 because you're meeting with some other people. So we're just going to do the one report. I will try to be as business-like as I possibly can, so I'll just ask everyone, we've only got literally half an hour, so we need to be quite on the button. Councillor Sutton, over to you.
This, Mr. Chairman, this mainly, albeit there's a children's element, it's been led by mainly the health and social care section. So Paul's going to open up to start with, if that's okay, and then come to me and I will talk mainly about the children's aspect of it, and then we can hand over to officers if that's okay.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, thank you very much for your indulgence. This is an introduction to Living My Best Life. It's the report on the joint strategy for disabled and neurodivergent people in Staffordshire for the next period of 2023-28. And we would like and canvass your opinions on this. This stretches across the three portfolios, which involves not just only health, children and adult services, but also education and more importantly, the SEND aspect. Many people with disabilities and neurodivergencies in the main have a positive experience and outcome. However, some don't experience the same opportunity that other people take for granted, Chairman. This strategy aims to improve the health and well-being, both with economic, educational and social outcomes, and to make Staffordshire a place where disabled people can thrive and live their best lives. We have the data on the amount of users that we have across the county, but for this strategy we've used the Equality Act's definition of what is disabled, rather than going through the narrower definition of service users for eligibility concerns. This Equality Act definition of physical or mental impairment with a significant and long-term adverse effect on an individual's ability to carry out a normal day-to-day activity, neurodivergencies about brain function and behaviours that are not considered typical but still need to be included. The strategy supports a wide range of people, not just those that receive particular services, but aims to raise the community awareness and remove the barriers so that people can be recognised and treated as individuals within that community, and not just for their disability and neurodivergence, so that doesn't define them. They live in, as a service user myself with a disabled condition, it doesn't define you, you just have to adapt to it. Accountability will come through our new county-wide joint disability partnership board arrangements, and that's guessing where, Chairman, you would like to perhaps in the future add that to your work plan. So that they overlook the strategy so that meaningful change can happen at scale. Disabilities and neurodivergencies can impact on people's experiences and their chances of reaching their full potential. They may struggle educationally, as you may know, and they may struggle at work as well. They may also have difficulty accessing social, leisure, retail, sport and cultural and religious opportunities that are in their local area, for example. Crucially, they may also feel more lonely and unsafe and feel more vulnerable to crime and abuse. They may also have problems accessing health services and also use of digital technologies, which this strategy hopes to at least mitigate. Certain disabilities and neurodivergencies are associated with an increased risk of chronic ill health and can shorten the life of an individual's life expectancy. And crucially, we need to also be in mind that some disabilities and neurodivergencies are not diagnosed Some are not visible, some are in that transitional period of getting that diagnosis or recognition. So not all people living with them want others to know their journey. This makes reducing inequalities and ensuring everybody can experience things on an equal way a more complex challenge because of this need to deep dive into the actual data and to make sure that the data that we capture is reflective of the actual need and not what we perceive to be through limited assurances through surveys. And this has gone through basically a two-stage process of canvassing users. We've wanted to listen to users, what's their journey, what's their need, how can we help you, and that's summarised in the next section of the report. And also the next stage is also a draft vision and priorities of the strategy, which has been discussed with disabled and neurodivergent people in Staffordshire. It's also been discussed obviously with politicians, carers and professionals in a face-to-face meeting in each district and borough for this January and February this year to seek their views. So I won't flood on because I'm mindful of the time, but I'll hand now over to officers for further enlightenment on the actual strategy itself.
Thank you.
In all fairness, Mr Chairman, I think it might be appropriate if I hand over to officers. I've got a few points I want to make, and if they're not covered in the presentation, then I can mention those. Otherwise, it potentially would just be a repeat.
Okay. Thank you very much for having us today to talk about this strategy. Just to introduce myself, my name is Nicola Day. I'm a Senior Commissioning Manager in the Learning Disability, Mental Health, Autism and Carers team in Staffordshire County Council. I'm here with my colleague who's a partner on this strategy. You want to introduce yourself, Karen?
Hi everybody, I'm Karen Webb. I'm a joint lead, so I work half-time for Staffordshire County Council and I spend half my time in the Integrated Care Board in the world of learning disability, autism and other neurodivergent conditions.
Thank you, Karen. This strategy, as you've probably worked out by now, is a joint strategy. So this is a joint County Council and ICB strategy, and it's been joint from the point at which we were scoping this and planning it all the way through to where we're at now in drafting the strategy, and it will continue as we look at drafting our action plan and delivering that. This is an all-age strategy as well. It covers disabilities of all types, but I'd just like to say here very carefully as well, it does not cover mental ill health. We do have a mental health strategy which covers that. So this strategy covers all other disabilities, but it does not cover those that are actually linked with mental ill health. And I think as Councillor Northcott has pointed out, there are a lot of people who don't necessarily identify as necessarily being disabled or neurodivergent, and you know, obviously they are an important part of this. And not all neurodivergences are also classified as disabilities as well, so we have actually separated that terminology out within the strategy. The strategy complements a number of other strategies. Obviously, I've mentioned the mental health strategy. SEND strategy is obviously one of those. Carers strategy is another. NHS operation and joint forward plan is another key area of work. The existing health and wellbeing strategy, and also our current autism implementation plan. Okay, I'll just move us on to our second slide. This is just a few key facts, so I won't dwell on this too much, but just to identify, and again, I think reiterate some of the points that have already been raised around this. As far as data in this area is concerned, it is quite difficult to get really comprehensive and good quality data. For adults, we do have national data sets. Poppy and Pansy are key for us. But they give us estimates of population, in a sense, demographics. In terms of consistency, some of those data sets don't necessarily give us a clear indication between different age groups either, and use different descriptors around some of the areas too. So just as an example, personal care activities is identified as a key marker in the 65 plus age group, but isn't in those under 65. We have different descriptors used there. So it becomes quite difficult in this area to actually provide key estimates really of all different disability types. And in terms of children and young people, data is even more limited in that particular group. And a lot of the data that we've used within the draft strategy at this point is data that actually uses a sort of 16 to 18 data that's available through some of the national adult data sets as well. There isn't actually a lot of data, and that data for that group is smaller studies. So what we've tried to do is pull together what we know and what we've got, but that just gives us an indication at this point. Much of our data as well is based on primary needs. And I think an interesting point here is that you can't add up, for example, the number of people that we know have learning disabilities or autism or physical disability and say that gives us a total number of people with disabilities in Staffordshire, because we do have a number of people who have multiple disabilities or more than one neurodivergence. So again, it's these types of issues that make, in a sense, understanding that data quite complicated for us. We do have, obviously, data that we collect through education, health and care plans, through GP registers, and I think over the course of the 5-year strategy here, I think, trying to utilise those to best effect will be really, really important for us, just to try and help us get a better picture of that. I'll just move us on to our next slide here. This, and I think this has been covered really quite comprehensively, I think, at the start of this, so I won't go over a lot of this in detail. But as far as the impact of disabilities and neurodivergences is concerned, they are wide-reaching. So as we've heard, most people will go through, will have an experience in life where the support and the networks around them mean that their experiences are generally positive, but there are a number of people who don't. And this recognises across the board the different impacts that this can have on somebody's wider quality of life. How the strategy has been informed. This strategy is basically it's come about from several stages really in terms of evidence. So we started looking at previous engagement. We've used, for example, engagement that the Integrated Care Board have done through co-production with people with learning disabilities and autism. But also we've brought together lots of previous engagement around carers, our Autism Joint Implementation Group, a previous disability strategy, and also mental health strategy work, and tried to pull together sort of core themes from that really helped us to understand about people's quality of life. We've looked at needs, and we've tried to identify obviously key factors there, which I've touched on previously. We've also looked at best practice as well. So what we're doing, what our local strategies and best practice is, but also looking at national strategies, acts of parliament, and obviously key here is the Equality Act, for example, and best practice guidance such as that from the National Institute of Health and Clinical Excellence, Care Quality Commission, and more. We've also used a community impact assessment process, and obviously that looks across equality impact, health and care impact, community impact, workforce impact, economic impact, and environmental and climate change impact as well. And we've also co-produced this strategy through 2 stages of engagement. The first was through a survey which went out across Staffordshire looking at quality of life. This survey was basically drafted using best practice in terms of health and social care to try and understand people's wider well-being and quality of life, and we applied that more broadly to look at broader quality of life for all individuals with neurodivergences and disabilities. That covered well-being and independence, having information that people need, so their access to information and advice, their relationships with family and friends and within their local communities, the care and support that some may be receiving, people's ability to be in control of their lives, and also around the staff and the workforce that support people. Over 500 people responded to our survey, and we had a really good range of demographics of survey respondents as well, from across Staffordshire, from across different genders and gender identities, sexual orientation groupings, ethnicity descriptions, and obviously different disabilities and neurodivergences. Okay. I won't go through the findings of that because they are actually identified within the strategy itself, but obviously that did identify to us some key areas where where people said we needed to look at those areas to help support a better quality of life for them, and those have actually helped us to develop a draft vision and draft outcomes for the strategy. So that was our phase 1 engagement. The phase 2 engagement then was face-to-face engagement across all 8 districts of Staffordshire. That we had about 80 attendees in total to that stage of our engagement, but we also went out to various other groups as well alongside that, and that included things like our learning disability and autism and adult social care carers forum, our Staffordshire Autism Implementation Group, various provider forums, and various voluntary organisations as well, and local networks. From that stage of our engagement, we were testing out the vision and the outcomes that we had proposed for the strategy following the first phase of our engagement, and it was very positive. As far as the feedback we received was concerned, most people agreed with the vision. We did make a few changes to that, but they were fairly minor. And the strategic outcomes, again, very broadly, they were well received by the groups that we engaged with. So that helped to verify to us that we were on the right track with the strategy at that point. Okay. I think a key question that probably will be raised around this is how representative a sample was, in a sense, was that sample that we engaged with, and how much can we draw conclusions from that. And I think an important point to raise here is that as we went through our engagement process, we got to a point where we were hearing the same thing over and over again from individuals who were responding to us. So when we got to that point, I think that helped us to understand at that stage that we had definitely got, I think, as good a grip, I think, in terms of what people felt they wanted to say about this, and we had taken that down and taken that on board. So I hope that gives you reassurance that we have heard what people have to say about this, and that we have assurances that that is representative of their views. At this point, can I pass on to you, Karen?
So as Nicola said, we didn't want to start from scratch because people have been telling us the same things for a very long time. What we wanted to do was just check it out, and the first stage gave us the starting point. The second stage was, right, this is what we think you're telling us. This is what all the evidence is telling us. This is what the vision is. And in all honesty, the vision, wanting to live in Staffordshire as an equal citizen and to get all the things that you need when you need it without blocks and barriers, I guess that is something that lots of people without a disability or that are neurodiverse take for granted. We don't perhaps recognise, particularly some of the hidden disabilities, how many blocks and barriers there are out there for people to get what most of us would perhaps take for granted. So I think by and large, the vision for the strategy was everything people told us. We played it back, and I think pretty much, I'm not quite sure how much more people would want from that. I think that they're asking for some pretty fundamental basic human rights within the strategy. Thanks, Nicola. Can you move us on? And I guess what we also did was we started to think about what they told us and how we played that back. And it's not, you know, some of the outcomes, people want to be in the centre of their care. They want things to be open and they want to be able to access things. So we used an example of if somebody was going for a physio appointment and they got there and it was on the 4th floor and there wasn't a lift and they were in a wheelchair, the vast majority of the workforce and society would think, how on earth did we get to that? You know, why would you put a service for somebody who can't access it on the 4th floor? But if somebody with a neurodiversity or a learning disability tried to attend the same appointment, they may be able to physically get there, but there may be lots of other blocks and barriers that we hadn't thought about to give them access to the things that they need. And that's not just across the NHS, that's across all aspects of life, that's society included. We really did, and people, it was very loud and clear, we are the experts, listen, please take on board, you ask the question, hear the answer and do something with it, because actually, by and large, we've probably been telling you for a very long time that we're not included. And you don't not include us on purpose most of the time. You just don't think in the way that we need you to think. And again, you know, people are saying, and we meet an awful lot of autistic people who need a bit longer to tell you and to communicate with you, but we're all in such a hurry sometimes that we don't give people the time and the space that they absolutely need. So people are kind of saying, don't speak for me, just give me the time to speak for myself. I want to be as in much choice and control in my own life as I can be. People want to be better informed. You know, this isn't about asking for something that's better than everybody else. This is about levelling things up. This is about saying, if I have to wait for something, I need to wait in the same way that anybody else would, not because I can't access it or because I've got a condition that you close my appointment or you don't give me access to what I need. And again, it's about looking at the person as a whole and life as a whole, because most of us don't rely on health and social care to live a life. It's important when it's important, but there are lots of other things that make life worth living. And that's what people kind of told us loud and clear. We did meet one or two mums of 5-year-olds who, I've been doing this a very long time, but I took their thoughts away with me. I want to be a mum. I kind of thought, well, you are a mum. But actually what they said was 90% of their time they were battling to get the things that their 5-year-old autistic child needed. And actually they wanted to be a mum. They wanted to go and play in the park. They wanted to go and do all the things that mums without autistic children did. So I think we had some very strong messages, didn't we, during the engagement piece. And it was absolutely well worth doing. Okay, Nicola, can you move it on? Okay, I think we kind of got to, it's all well and good having a strategy, you know, and most people said to us, well, okay, is this something else that you're going to put on a shelf, or are you really going to listen and do something about it? But one of the key take-home messages is don't do to us. We are the experts in our own lives, so we absolutely want the support to help ourselves. So this is about not doing to people or for people, it's about including them in the way that we move forward. Supporting building the support in the communities around them. Health and social care in particular are big players, big partners, and actually we should be leading by example and influencing other partners that maybe don't have the same levels of experience that we do. So in housing, in employment, in everyday community access, if we can start to get people to think differently about including disabled and neurodiverse people, for everybody we influence by our own behaviours, it's another door that's open to this group of people that perhaps wasn't before. We talk about adjustments, that's a word that we use, and in the NHS, I know we use that word a lot, but what does it mean? And how do we start to think about what do I need to do to make what I do accessible? If I'm planning something, have I thought about it? If I'm buying something, if I'm delivering something, even in the voluntary sector, you know, how do we start challenging society to be more inclusive in their thinking? Embracing technology, that was loud and clear that lots of our neurodiverse young people who struggle with social cues said, there's lots of technology out there, please use it. You know, it's not for everybody, but please start to think about some of the things that could actually include us on a more wider basis. Promoting independence was coming out loud and clear that they do not want to be dependent, but we, the royal we, can make them dependent on the basis of exclusion and not being available or being able to get the support that they need. And again, lots of people with a disability told us that you look at what we can't do and you focus on all the things that we can't do. Well, how about starting to see us as equal to you, with strengths and talents in the same way that you do, but actually remove some of your blocks, and actually we will have the same value in society as the people that don't have a disability or a neurodiversity or learning disability. Okay, Keller? I think we're going back to you on that one.
Thank you, Karen. So this, just to tie up this final slide, in terms of next steps, we're currently, the strategy is currently sitting with a designer to try and obviously create a final draft of that, and one which can be accessible online and also downloadable, can be accessible through British Sign Language and Easy Read, so that we have a lot of development to do to make that accessible. We also are working with children's colleagues and the Voice Project to develop a plan on a page for children and young people. That's being done in co-production with a group of children and young people currently as well. So that's in the process of being designed as we speak. Once the strategy is ready to launch, obviously communication of that is going to be key, trying to make sure that as many people know about this as possible, so using all of the networks that we can, and obviously I think importantly going back to a lot of the groups and saying who've talked to us, who've shared information with us, and then a lot of life stories as well along the way. What we're doing with this as well, and how we've responded. We are looking to co-produce an action plan hopefully by December of this year, and we're in the very early stages of thinking through that at this point in time. And in terms of ongoing governance arrangements, we will be reporting on our progress with the action plan and with the delivery of the strategy through the Disability Partnership Board and ultimately through the Health and Wellbeing Board, and as required as well through other networks, including things like the Integrated Care Board and Cabinet. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Councillor Wildman.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've got two comments. One is around, so it's would you call it Section 8, Paragraph 8 of the document, or 8 and 9, which talk about their views on the quality of life. And at 9 it says they do not have as many, well, they believe they do not have as many opportunities as they like to learn and develop. And the third point on there is are not getting as much help as they would like when needed. I've read the strategy, maybe I'm missing something, and I don't like to be too critical, but I'm not sure I can find something within that strategy that targets those 2 points. So if you can educate me on where in that strategy those 2 points are addressed. Thank you. And then the second point before is the action plan, December 2023. That seems quite far out to me. Are we not producing it now so that we can do it and get it going straight away? Thank you.
I'll just take a few more. Councillor Wilcox.
Thank you, Chairman. Obviously, key to the strategy being successful is the way in which we engage with all the organisations to make sure that they're bought into the concept that we've had. But also, how will we measure what success looks like, or what are the practical things that can happen that we can then reflect back and say, well, actually, in doing this, we've enabled these people to be able to do that. So it's all around how can we measure, and the first bit about how do we ensure that all the organisations are bought into this at an early stage. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Edgeler.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you very much for your presentation. My question really relates to how do we help these people in the in their working life? You know, do we help them or give them support in their to get jobs? You know, that's my question. Thank you.
I'll stop there to let you reflect on those three, and then I think there's another three to follow.
Shall I take the first one? Yeah, I think if we start with employment, I think we absolutely know when we were out and about, lots of people said employment was really difficult because people really didn't understand, particularly neurodiversity and autism. And one of the things I heard was from Staffordshire Police, actually, who've actually got a charter around their workforce and around how they support autistic police officers. So I think there's pockets of really fabulous practice out there, but actually people like the job centres and job seekers and some of the other agencies that we work with, they really don't fully understand. It's not that they don't want to help, I don't think they know how to help. And I don't know whether any of you saw the story of Oliver McGowan, who was a young man who died. He had autism and he died as a result of significant failings, particularly in the NHS. But when you listen to his mum speak, she talks about all the talents that he had and that she saw as a mum, but actually the people that he came across treated what they saw and not treated him and didn't look at that. So I think we are going to be rolling out the Oliver McGowan training, which has now become law, to start to think about, so what's the insight, what's the awareness, how can we start to get people to think differently about the kinds of support. Some of the support is quite simple, some of it is more intense, but I come back to health and social care are big employers. Do we really make the adjustments that we need to make? And as such, then how do we influence other people who don't have the infrastructures that we do and don't have the understanding that we do? So I think we're probably going to, one of the measures is going to be a big question to health and to social care. So what do you do then? And how can you be the leaders and influence of making sure that other agencies follow suit and they learn from us? So I think that the employment bit is the one. Do you want to look at paragraph 8 and 9, Nicola?
Okay, so in paragraph 8 and 9, can I just double check then? So this is around people supporting and getting as much help as they would like. Is that, those are the two key points? So 9, 1 and 3. Okay. In terms of opportunities to learn and develop, I think key here is going to be the equity of access to opportunities. That, I think, flows through every single one of those points that you see there, and will also reflect that really how we would like to address point 3 as well. Having that equity of access to opportunities, if we look at a number of people who are, for example, accessing further and higher education with disabilities and neurodivergencies currently, being able to open that up through greater access, through asking those questions, what adjustments can we make so that those opportunities are more available, I think is going to be key here. But also that learning and development for us is not just about what people do under the age of 25, it's also in relation to work, it's in relation to lifelong learning opportunities as well. So it goes across the board from where we look at this. As far as point 3 is concerned, people not getting as much help as they'd like when needed, again, that equity of access should actually help to turn off that tap if people are getting that access to opportunities, and hopefully that is going to be a key benefit. Where people need help and support, our strategic outcome number 5 also is very much focused on that support in relation to health and social care, and very much focusing on that being personalised. So the key issue there is to ensure personalised care and support does actually help them get the support when needed. Also, having good information and advice that is accessible to people allows people to help to find things that will help them. And that might be reading about information, but there's an awful lot of things that are going on in local communities that people don't have yet that knowledge about. And this is about trying to link people up with a lot of voluntary organisations, community organisations that are doing an awful lot and are actually really quite open to and welcoming of people with any background. So what we need to do is try and help to make that more accessible to people and share the information that we have around what is going on, and also help keep that feedback loop working as well, so that we learn about more opportunities, and we also look to develop more opportunities as well to support that.
I think one of the things with the strategy, we've probably lived and breathed it, and we saw it from iteration 1 that was huge and had loads of information in it, down to the iteration that it is today. And I think we took it through the Quality and Safety Committee in the ICB yesterday, and they had a very similar question, that when you're reading it cold, have we lost a little bit of translation? And I think that's probably what you're saying, that realistically, because we have got to the point now where people have said, don't write a 50-page document because who's going to read it? How do you make the pages that you do write meaningful? And how do you make sure that actually what comes beyond the strategy in the outcomes and the so what is there? So I think you're probably highlighting something that the ICB did yesterday. They completely got where we were trying to get to, but had we lost a little bit of translation and it was, I think it was pretty much the same points.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, I think there's a bit the point that Mike was saying as well. It's really difficult sometimes where, and I hate to use this term motherhood and apple pie, but it's language that's just a bit of waffle. It's not waffle. That's a bad term. I'm not going to accuse of that. But I would like to see kind of measures which I can then actually measure, so I can actually see, well, is this strategy working? And I'm not 100% sure that with the content is at the moment. I think that would be quite difficult to do, just because it isn't like, right, well, we're going to do this, that and the other. It's kind of expanding this, continuing this. Well, in what way? I mean, in continuing it, well, we're already doing it, aren't we? Or I just find that there's perhaps, and I suppose it's a bit of a challenge, that we need to be a little bit more specific on the things that we want to achieve. And I suspect that if I look at the action plan, when you produce it, that will all be in there. So I think that's it. But if we could perhaps bring it out more, just a little bit more in the strategy, so it feels a little bit more like we can measure something, that would be fantastic. But I don't doubt there's a huge amount of work gone into it. There's no criticism of that, and I hope the action plan details that in more detail. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that covered your point as well, didn't it, Councillor Wilcox? Yeah. Did you want to add something to it?
If I can, just in as much as a lot of the work that needs to be done is by other organisations out of our control, really. So it's making sure that the story that lands with them is one that they need to be brought into this process. Otherwise, the strategy will be, in a sense, worthless if it's just a strategy that we produce for the county and no one else is actually taking it on board and making changes happen that would improve the opportunities for the people that we're trying to help along the journey.
Thank you. I'm conscious of the time. I'm going to just limit it to the last 3 questions. Councillor Pardeshi.
Thank you, Chair. Just 2 very quick points. On the Oliver McGowan case that you mentioned, it very much illustrated for me, for want of a better word, the arrogance of professionals and health professionals who believed they knew Oliver far better and knew what was best for him than his own mother and round-the-clock carer did. Secondly, on page 20, the last paragraph, rightly or wrongly, I'm a bit uncomfortable with that sentence there. It's about quality and value for money, and it says about a good standard of care and support, as well as spending public money wisely and living within our means. I'm assuming that that is something that's implicit in all the work that we do. And unless this is something that is written in every single report that we write, my discomfort is with the fact that this is a report about people with disabilities who, to a large extent, in lots of ways, have already been left behind. And it's almost reinforcing that perception that, well, we'll do it if we have the money. Maybe I'm not explaining that too well, but that's my gut reaction to that sentence, Chair.
No, thank you. I think I share those concerns as well. Councillor Snape.
Thank you for the report. One very quick question. One of your earlier slides, you said that in the over 65s, disabilities will rise by 30% over the next so many years, and autism, etc., in the under 17s by 5%. Where do those figures come from? What evidence has been used to make those suggestions?
While you're thinking that through, I'll take the final question from Councillor Mann.
Press the right button. My question leads from, in part anyway, from much of what's been said. And it's the whole business of culture having strategy for breakfast. And you mentioned the piece about dependency. They don't want to be dependent on people. The NHS is particularly guilty of this, but it happens here as well. We talk about what's the matter with you rather than what matters to you, and without a real effort to modify the culture on the ground from all organisations responsible for these people, the strategy is not going to deliver that independence. And with the independence comes so much of the other stuff that you mentioned in the strategy. I know an organisation where that has taken on a youngster with quite severe autism who's absolutely blossomed. Now, the benefits of getting this right could be enormous for these people because they have skills that people who aren't neurodivergent simply don't have. But if we don't deal with the dependency, we're not going to get there. So.
Thank you for that. It is concerning to me that I have to try to push this forward, and I hope we're giving the report due regard. Could I just ask you to maybe respond to those last three questions? Councillor Sutton.
Yeah, can I officers respond to the others? I wanted just to respond to that the cost of care and value for money one, and I will do very, very shortly. I think as a general point, and this goes for every strategy that is now produced, we really have given officers a steer that they will not be too long. I mean, we've said things like on 6-7 pages, something along those. They're easy to read. They are written so that the people out there that they are ultimately for are able to understand. There's not too much officer speak. you have to be careful, I think, also dumbing things down too much. But, you know, when I worked for the legal ombudsman, we used to write letters, and the line was that you write the same letter to the solicitor as you do to the complainant, you know, so that they can both it can be understood, and you don't adapt it for, you know, in a different way. And I think that's a good way of writing strategies, plain English, so people can understand them. They're relatively short. But that does lead us to the point there, doesn't it, is where people will say, well, what are you going to achieve? How are you going to, not what you're going to achieve, how are you going to do these things? You know, and that does come, I think, in that action plan. And I hope that when that action plan is developed, a lot of those points will be, you know, will be covered. I think, and also I think everything that we do, you know, there is a finite amount of finances available, so it has got to be used in the best way possible. We do have to work together across partners to be able to do that. But I very much take the point that if that is something that is in one strategy, you know, around care and support, then it should ultimately be in, you know, all strategies that are about care and support, because it should apply equally, I think, across the board. I'll let officers answer the other two more technical points.
I'm so sorry, I've got a group of autistic people, and if I'm not there by 1 o'clock, it kind of almost says the reverse about the strategy, doesn't it? I'll leave Nicola with you.
Okay, so picking up on the point that you've raised around the data and the over 65s, the data that we use, Poppy and Pansy, actually uses, it looks at population predictions over, I think it's the following sort of 20 years. And what it does is it predicts the prevalence of different, it might be health conditions, in this case, different disabilities, over that time period. So that information does actually come from that national data set. And it also, the information that's derived for the under 18s also has come from that. Okay.
Thank you. I just sort of questions. It just seems a very, very high figure, 30% to increase by that. It's as if it's a worst case, even doomsday type scenario.
I think that's probably highly linked to the fact that we have an ageing population, and it is actually a result of that ageing population, which is why we're seeing that estimated figure actually quite significantly higher. So if the proportion of the population remains the same, who are affected by those disabilities over that time, that's where the estimate will come from. Thank you. Okay. I think we've picked up on the money one, haven't we? And the culture change is a really good question. This one, I think we have to recognise that this strategy is not just a strategy for the County Council and the Integrated Care Board to deliver. This is everybody's business. And this is, you know, organisations, individuals across Staffordshire, individuals with disabilities and neurodivergences themselves as well. So I think, yeah, how we go about this, it's a big and difficult task. And I don't think any of us starting on this journey would think otherwise. You know, this is about changing hearts and minds. And that is never an easy process. But with the right action plan, and as you say, you know, making sure that that the actions in there are specific, they're measurable, they're time limited, you know, they're realistic, and that we have good measures linked to those is going to be absolutely key as we move into developing our action plan on this, and that is absolutely our intention.
Councillor Wilcox.
In taking that one step further, I think the districts and boroughs have a really big part to play, because they will have and be linked into all the business contacts that they have in their areas. So they will be the ideal conduit to promote this sort of work going forward. So if we can make sure that they're brought into the organisational part of that as well, I think that's really worthwhile.
At this point, they're actually a group that we would like to bring onto our Disability Partnership Board as well. So that, I think, will be a really, really useful mechanism for us to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that was a really positive note to finish on, really, there. I think I thank you for the report. Thank you for coming, explaining and answering all the questions. Again, I think we do have that reassurance that such an important area of business for us is being properly managed, and we look forward to, as was raised previously, I'm sure you heard the voices around how do we know what success looks like and all of that. I think that is essential as we move forward. But thank you again. Thank you for coming. I will carry on whilst the speakers are leaving. Last item, item 6. There isn't no. And it's the work programme.
So I'm very conscious that it's been a very long morning, and I'm also very conscious that Trish and Victoria Wilson, who very kindly sat for a good part of the morning, didn't have the opportunity to present their few slides. So having spoken to the chair and to them, the suggestion is that we try or I organise an informal session as soon as possible so that they can then present their slides, and then you've got a full picture then of all the areas of potential future work to inform your work programme. In the interim, what I will do is put together all the information that we've had from the slides, from the work programme planning today. There seems to me that, well, there's an awful lot, isn't there, that's come out of today as proposed items for your agenda. There are also some that followed over. So it might be sensible if I put those all together in one note for yourselves and circulate that, get a date in everybody's diaries for an informal session as quickly as possible with Victoria Wilson and with Trish Caldwell, so that we can add that to it and then look at informing that work programme. You have your July meeting on the 27th of July is already really in for you, because it's the 2 sets of complaints that come annually. Yeah. And also, if you remember, as part of the sexual harassment in schools, one of the recommendations was the PHSE coordinator that the Commissioner had funded, looking at their impact 12 months on, so he's coming in to do that. So July is done, and I'll try and get this informal session in as quickly as possible, and as I say, circulate a note of what we've done, if everybody's happy with that, because it is.
Could we do it on Teams, or do we have to come in? Or would people prefer to come in?
Whatever anybody would prefer, really.
I prefer Teams, but I think out of respect to the people that reports, it might be better to do face-to-face.
Well, maybe we ask them if they want to look us in the eye. Then I doubt very much they will, but if they do, fine. Okay. I'm just thinking that we do need to hear that, so we've got a full picture. Sorry, Paul, go on. Yeah.
My last comment to those, the officer and Mark there, about the 30% increase. When we talk now about a 64 pence in the pound budget of going towards that, if that's going to increase, we've got to start planning now for what's going to happen in 10 years' time. As with COVID, we weren't prepared. We must make sure we're prepared for, because it's.
The Cabinet's fully aware of it.
Well, you're the expert, so thank you for that.
It's a problem.
Thank you, John. Thank you.